Hi, folks, and welcome to the MASFAA podcast. My name is Jonathan Hughes, and I'm the host of the MASFAA podcast, and we have something a little different for you today. This is something like a bonus edition of the MASFAA podcast, and typically with these shows, we are addressing families or students. And while any families or students are certainly welcome to listen to this show, this episode is geared more towards our colleagues in financial aid offices. Now, if you've heard me talk at all, you've probably heard me extol the virtues of the financial aid office as a resource for students. And they're certainly invaluable partners to MASFAA as well. And this past November, the annual conference for MASFAA, the Massachusetts Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, was held in Plymouth. And I was lucky enough to be joined by a few speakers at that conference on this podcast, and we recorded our conversation for you to enjoy. So you're going to hear some thoughts from Anthony Erwin and Anne McDermott. Anthony Erwin has had a long career in financial aid, including stints at Northeastern University, Stonehill College, and Bridgewater State, as well as a long history of volunteering. In fact, he served as a past president of MASFAA and of EASFAA, which is the Eastern Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. And he now works for NASFAA, the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, for their Blue Icon division, which you'll hear him talk about in just a minute. Anne McDermott is the Director of Financial Aid at Salve, Regina University in Rhode Island, and has had stints at Fisher College in Boston and Montserrat College of Art in Beverly. She's also the current president of EASFAA. Now, I do have to apologize for some glitches in the audio and the video. Apparently just one of the dangers that you can't anticipate when recording on location. So my apologies to the guests, particularly to Anne and to you, the audience. But let's jump to our conversations with Tony and Anne and hear them talk about their current roles and responsibilities.
So Blue Icon Advisors is a wholly owned subsidiary of NASFAA, the National Association of Financial Aid Administrators. And we were in existence for about 3.5 years. And we offer consulting services to colleges and universities across the country. And so where NASFAA as a membership organization provides services and support for, thousands of members across the country, our focus is really much more customized solutions specific to challenges that institutions are facing. We offer both individualized and group coaching. So individualized coaching for new financial aid leaders who perhaps have many years of financial aid experience but have not had leadership roles before, or in some cases who have many years of leadership experience but very few years of financial aid experience. And we're helping bridge that knowledge gap. And we also provide group coaching for both new and aspiring financial aid directors. In my role as principal consultant, I oversee our business development efforts as well as manage a number of the projects that we perform. Projects range anywhere from interim staffing and leadership to offices to conducting compliance or operation or service reviews of offices for looking to improve.
So I'm Anne McDermott. I am the Director of Financial Aid at Salve Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. We have been living in Newport for about 8 years. I've been at Salve for all of those 8 years. And I'm this year's EASFAA president. Prior to living in Newport, we were in Beverly, Mass. So we lived in Massachusetts for a long time. So I'm a prior MASFAA member as well. So I worked in Boston at Fisher College for quite a few years. And then I left Fisher when I had my first child, and I worked at Montserrat College of Art, which was closer to home where we lived in Beverly. And then after that, then we moved to Newport.
I was curious, though, as to how Tony and Anne landed in financial aid.
So I attended Stonehill College as an undergraduate student, and in the spring of my freshman year, I was starting to look for summer jobs of that year and saw a posting that the financial aid office was hiring a full-time work study student for the summer. I lived locally to Stonehill, and so I decided to apply for that, got the job, and that's what started my journey in financial aid, which happens to many financial aid professionals who might start as a work study student. I spent that summer, and then the next 3 summers, all 3 of the summers, I was between my after my freshman year through graduating, working in the office. I worked throughout the academic year as a gosh, it's so funny. As a junior or senior, I don't remember now because it's been so long. It's been more than many minutes. I did an internship in the financial aid office, I think part-time during one of the academic semesters. Eileen O'Leary, who was the former director at Stonehill, who was a longtime friend and mentor, offered me the opportunity to attend the College Board's Institute on Financial Aid, I think as a senior, if I remember correctly, and attended that and never left the profession. Started there and never left.
And what was it that appealed to you about that?
The intersection of the ability to work with people, right? To have the interaction with students and families and colleagues and have that interaction with people, but also have a large component of your job that it was about process and organization and the math, right? And the eligibility and the right. To me, it was just, I love the combination of those things because I could not see myself doing either of those things all of the time. And the opportunity to combine both of those things, I thought, I just really just found it compelling because you were doing what some would consider to be the most boring kind of work, but it was directly related to helping the people that you might have just talked to or that you might be talking to tomorrow. And the intersection of that, to me, was just very interesting at the time. I ended up shaping, in my junior year before I declared my major, I ended up declaring a communication major at Stonehill and a business minor. And I don't think I declared my communication major till then, partly because I didn't, there's no financial aid major, right, as an undergraduate, but I was headed in that direction and I really liked the intersection of both of those things. So I ended up, I won't say I specifically chose my major because I wanted to be a financial aid professional, but the communication element to me was always very, very interesting.
So I have a little bit of a crazy story and I won't get into it just for the sake of time, but I will give you the very brief version. After I graduated from college, I started working in college admissions, loved working in admissions, but was just sort of ready to move on. My boss, which now I think is crazy, was like, well, there's a director of financial aid position open. I had no experience in financial aid, but he was a big believer in transferable skills and was, pretty confident that, he could, if offered this job, that I could move over there and be successful. It was rough in the beginning. And as you can imagine, it was also very rough on my staff to have a new boss who didn't know anything about financial aid. But at the time, we had like the plain old printed out FSA handbook, and I took that thing everywhere and eventually got caught up. But it was definitely a very difficult transition in the beginning. But fast forward 15 years to today, I am so much happier working in financial aid than I would have been, I think, if I had stayed in admissions.
I wanted to ask Anthony about the national scope that his work has. One of the things that always interests me is how different the aid landscape is in different parts of the country.
We certainly don't, we're not the only part of the country in New England that has the depth and breadth of institutions, but it stands out, right? You get to New England, you really just have such a substantial depth and breadth of institutions. And that presents a lot of opportunities. So you have that is kind of a major difference from many parts of the country. You have the opportunity. I think about it from a different, one of the lenses I think about this a little bit, and is kind of in the context of volunteerism and professional development, and how really, how some of the states and regional associations are different than others. And I think, one of the positives in Massachusetts and New England is, the geography allows for easier interaction, right? So you don't have to get on a plane generally to see anybody who you need to see, or have an event pretty much anywhere in New England. You may prefer to, but you don't have to. Versus other parts of the country where you're in Texas, right? You are flying to get everyone in the state in a location in many cases, or certainly in California. And I think that that allows for familiarity among the states in New England that may not happen other places. So there may be lots of familiarity inside the state or in regions of the state, but because of how compact New England is, we experience that same kind of familiar relationship across several states that other parts of the country may only have it within even a region of their state. So you get to, I think, experience what life is like at a lot of different types of institutions and in different parts of New England that you might not otherwise experience in other parts of the country where just the distance doesn't allow for that. So you get a little more of that depth. I don't want to suggest at all that my colleagues come from other states are not fully engaged with their peers and all that, but you know, I will say on probably the more humorous side, you also do get the funny where I might hear one of my colleagues from Nebraska who says, you know, that she's going to drive, 7 hours to attend a meeting. And I think that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. If I drove 7 hours, I could be in DC, right? Or I could be in Canada, or I could be on a plane and I could be in Europe. But that's just a normal drive. That's the commitment that they've made to just work with each other and to do the professional development that they want to do in the professional association involvement. I'm not sure a New Englander would do that because we don't, we don't have those long car drives that, to volunteer. But it is interesting, having spent my whole career in New England and now having an opportunity for a much broader national view, just how much experience you can get for different types of institutions, different types of students, with really not having to move too far from where you are. One thing that it also strikes me as probably a little more challenging that we might have is, I also think, because of the number of institutions and the number of professionals, sometimes it's been easier in a state like Massachusetts that has so many schools and so many professionals to assume that someone else is going to do the work when it comes to, for example, stepping up to run MASFAA or to organize a conference like this, or to do any number of things that we all benefit from, because there are just hundreds of potential people to do it. Versus in other parts of the country where there are fewer institutions, fewer professionals, those folks there's a direct impact. Like there's almost more of a sense of an obligation in those parts of the country because there's a fewer number of people who can do it, versus here where there's a huge number of people can do it, but then sometimes nobody does it, or fewer people do it because everyone thinks someone else can because there's plenty of people who could.
Yes, volunteerism. We talked a lot at the conference about how important it is to volunteer for professional associations. So I had two leaders who could speak personally to their experiences volunteering and why it was important to them.
I think that EASFAA and really volunteerism in general fills that like social hole for me, because I am by nature like I do like to get out and meet new people and have like all of the conversations with friends on the road, and volunteering has given me that opportunity in a smaller way, so that I do feel like I'm able to like scratch that itch, shall you say, like, that I'm able to get that piece of me, out there. But as far as volunteering, I didn't volunteer right away. My first few years in financial aid, I had a very full plate, as we talked about, and volunteering was just not on my radar. The Rhode Island Student Financial Aid Association is small. So somebody had asked me, are you interested in running? This was after a few years of being, involved, but not in any official capacity. Somebody had asked me if I wanted to run for president. And at the time, my second child was just born, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And then I was like, you know what? Yes, I can. And truly the reason why I said yes was because I felt like it was my turn. Rhode Island, there's only so many schools, and, we kind of just rotate around, like each director or associate director or any other willing person from any of those offices just kind of take turns, that it's your turn to be president. And I felt a little bit like, oh, well, Salve hasn't had any representation for a little while. It's just my turn. It's the right thing to do. So I said yes. And it has turned into now, I've been serving. So that was my first. So Rhode Island, when I was the Rhode Island state representative, I served as the Rhode Island representative to EASFAA. And I've been on the EASFAA council now for 7 years. So it's been really great.
And so what would you say are some of the benefits of, being part of that professional association?
I think that volunteering has given me so much more than what I have given the association. And really the one thing that it boils down to is the opportunity to network. Financial aid jobs are not easy, and there's no way that one person is going to know every single thing. And having a large network of people to call upon when you don't know how to do something, or there's a regulation that comes down and you just need somebody else to read it with you and see what their interpretation is. I have found that having that wide network that comes through volunteering has been professionally the best thing that I could have done.
When I started, I mentioned my longtime friend and mentor, Eileen O'Leary, Pam Gilligan, who was the director of financial aid at Berklee College of Music, my first boss in a professional setting. Those folks, first of all, they led by example. So they were leaders who were deeply engaged. And so they set that example, but they also set that expectation. So I don't actually recall a time where I was ever voluntold to volunteer. I was certainly voluntold to do many other things in my career, but to volunteer, it never seemed optional, because I worked for people early in my career, starting as a work study student through early in my career, who did that. And first of all, it just made it seem engaging and rewarding, but also just set the expectation that this is what you do. So my journey starting on that wasn't like one day I thought, oh, gee, I'd like to get involved in professional development. It was I have to, because it was just seen as something desirable. And I think the benefits to the individual, I couldn't possibly stop listing the benefits to me as a professional for all the relationships I've made, the places I've been, the things I've gotten to experience, and the opportunity to give back is just been so rewarding over many, many years. There's also benefit to institutions. And so I talked about kind of the individuals, but I have also been very fortunate that the institutions I have worked through over my career have also supported and expected volunteerism, and generally for one and or two reasons. The first is because they have understood the value of promoting the institution through having highly engaged professionals, and that is a means of promoting the institution. The second is, most senior leaders in institutions want information about what's going on external to the institution. So as an aid director, for example, I would be asked, some new regulation, some problem, some opportunity, what's going on in the field. And if I literally never leave my office and have no relationships outside, how am I going to answer that question? And so, I always try to make the case for my colleagues who struggle with getting the commitment from their institutions around professional development, time for volunteerism, that there's actually not just value to the individual, but there's value to the institution. It is part of the brand building of the institution, but also you bring information back that is valuable. And if they never let you leave your office, you're never bringing any new information back around that. So I think there's lots of value there. And I think, and I know that I've spent really my whole career deeply engaged for those reasons. It's also, just the way it's just more fun, right? There are parts of being a financial aid professional that are very, very not fun, right? Incredibly not fun. And so the opportunity to engage in both advancing the profession, advancing the work we do for students, but also just having fun with colleagues across the country makes a huge difference, and it makes something more of a profession and less of a job.
Related to supporting your colleagues, I asked Anthony and Anne, what are financial aid offices experiencing right now in these uncertain times, and where do they need support, and how can we support them?
It probably would come to no surprise to any of your listeners that just overall staffing levels are a substantial pain point at this point for many, many offices. And whether it be because of retirements, people making different choices about, their staying home with children, or different choices about how they want to spend their time and energy in their work, whatever the drivers, when you add up, there is a substantial gap in talent in the financial aid profession right now. And that is a pronounced pain point for many institutions. And we hear that at Blue Icon really across the country. So historically, that might be true in an area of the country where there are less institutions, less population. The geography is not so friendly for recruiting in a reasonable distance. We never heard that in Massachusetts, right? We never heard that in Connecticut or New York or in the Mid-Atlantic, because there's such a density of population in schools. We hear that everywhere now, that there is just a talent gap in aid. And so the result is institutions are taking longer to fill positions. And when they are filling positions, are offering hiring with less experience or no experience versus what they might have otherwise hired. So it introduces, then the second pain point is there's a deeper training curve, right? So it takes longer for that new person who you've really waited a long time for to find and you're super excited about, but it takes longer for them to really be super productive in the job because they're coming in many cases now with no or very limited experience based on what historically we as hiring supervisors may have hired 5 years ago for those same types of positions. So it introduces kind of that next pain point. So that's a whole huge bucket. I would say next big bucket is the pace of change at institutions. During and post pandemic, many institutions who perhaps have never, many institutions are changing academic format, program offerings, doing things that they never did before, which introduces both potential compliance risks and operational needs. And some aid professionals are well positioned at their institutions to address those concerns, and others aren't included in those conversations. And so if I was going to describe it as a pain point, it's when institutions are moving faster than they've ever moved before, but not having their aid leader as part of that conversation, that is a pain point for many aid offices. Our work at Blue Icon around our individual coaching, certainly our group coaching, is really trying to help newer financial aid professionals and leaders develop their voice, right? To both understand the materials, the reference materials, their utilization, but also how to represent that in a collaborative way on their campus so that they are positioned to be partners in growth and change and not just processors or gatekeepers around that.
I mean, definitely the Great Resignation has affected all of us. I have not suffered in my own office, but my staff have stayed on, which I'm forever grateful for, but many offices at Salve are short-staffed, and I know that many of my financial aid call. So yeah, people, and the financial aid community in general needs staffing. Years ago, when these jobs were classified, I think that they were classified as, simpler jobs than what we are doing today. The jobs, the financial aid counselors now are, at least in my opinion anyway, the job is very different than it used to be a few years ago, even 5-10 years ago. We're dealing with more regulations, students who are having mental health crisis and who just need some extra help. And I wish that the pay scales reflected really what we're doing today rather than what the jobs were classified at years ago. So I think that that's making the staffing issue even harder because there's other industries or other areas of higher ed that someone could get into that might be more enticing particularly for a young person who's just joining higher education.
How can we support aid administrators improve?
To the question of morale, I always feel like, and probably more so than ever, there's always two tracks for me for morale. There's the daily, just trying to create a positive environment for the people you're working with and having good working relationships and having moments of joy. And where can you find those at the time when you are responsible for things that sometimes can feel joyless, but finding those moments of joy in working with each other and empowering members of a team that are predetermined to be good planners of fun, right? And let them go. I always feel like there's a track there, but there's also a track around morale that to me is a deeper issue, which is around feeling engaged and valued as a professional. And that doesn't come unless people feel like they have a voice and and that the work that they do matters, so that there's a connection to that work, to student outcomes, to perhaps the long-term mission of the institution, the long-term success of students.
I wanted to ask Anne in particular how she would advise someone who is new in the field.
One of the things that I talk about a lot is just building your network, like we talked about earlier. And like, how can you do that? Well, the first step is like just a little tiny baby step into volunteering. Like maybe it's just volunteering on a committee within your state association. That's a light lift. Most of those roles are maybe an hour a week, but it gives you access to so many people. Because at least for me anyway, the networking piece has been so helpful, but also like somebody who's brand new coming into financial aid, I would tell them to get very familiar with AskRegs.
What is Ask Regs?
So Ask Regs is a NASFAA tool that you can type in your question and get an answer to regulatory, any regulatory questions that you have. You can see what other people have written before. You can have somebody from, someone weighs in, a professional weighs in on what the answers are. But it's really a helpful tool in trying to understand what some of these complicated federal regulations really say. And like I said, there's so many people out there who are willing to help. Financial aid administrators are so generous with their information and so willing to share that I find it to be like, it's so fun to really ask other people and to like figure it out together. And it makes you feel like a little less pressure. Like, okay, I'm not making this decision by myself. Like I'm getting, my colleagues to weigh in on what they think. And if I asked 5 people and we're all thinking the same thing, like, okay, this must be right. And I've gotten so much help that now I'm like, okay, make sure, Anne, if someone ever is asking you, that I'm doing the same, like just kind of, doing the same thing that someone else has, sharing that same knowledge that someone has shared with me.
Finally, I always like the reminder that what we do really does matter to people. It has a huge impact on their lives for the better. And I like a nice ending. So I asked Anne if she had a story that could help me out with both.
Yes, I have a great one that was a student that worked in my office when she was a freshman, only for one semester. And she was considering transferring and during that semester. And I brought her into my office because that's my job. And her family was living in very rural Vermont and like hadn't gotten the FAFSA quite right because it was a complicated FAFSA because they own a farm, and we just needed to the information was incorrect. And once we took the time to figure it out, she got significantly more. And I never knew because she left working in that particular work study position. I knew she stayed at Salve, but I didn't know the rest of the story. And she graduated this May, and right before she graduated, she came in very shy person, and just said like, "Hi, Anne," and just put a little letter on my desk and turned around and walked away. I never actually spoke to her other than hello. And it was this beautiful letter about like how I changed her whole life. That hour that I took, I got even choked up just thinking of it. Like, and I didn't realize that's just my job. I didn't think I was even doing anything special for this particular student. It was just my job to do that. And she happened to work in my office. That helping her to figure out how to gain access to some additional dollars was really the reason that she stayed, that she hadn't wanted to tell us that the reason that she was considering leaving was financial. So in the early conversations I had with her, I thought it was financial plus some other things, when it was really just financial. And so she thanked me for the help that I had given her. And she had gotten a job as a nurse and had made some lifelong friends that she was really excited, to be moving on to the next stage of her life with. So it was beautiful. And of course, I get all choked up, and she leaves, and I didn't even, like I said, I didn't even have a chance to even talk to her, but it was very moving, and just a reminder of what we do in the lives that we really are changing, even though sometimes it just feels like it's our job. That it's not going to be every student. For some students, it really is just like, oh, yep, they're just doing their thing in financial aid. But for some, it really is life-changing, and an opportunity to change the trajectory of their life. And it's very nice if a student takes the time, to let you know, because the job is challenging, and it feels really good to hear from students who have gotten, seen success through the work that a financial aid administrator has done.
Thanks to Anthony Erwin and Anne McDermott for taking time to sit and talk with me. We really do appreciate all that they do and all you do as financial aid administrators. And well, if you like the show today and you want to hear more from MASFAA on planning, saving, and paying for college and career readiness, you can check out the show wherever you find your podcasts. And please remember to review us. It helps us to keep doing what we're doing and getting this show out to folks like you. I want to thank Sean Connolly, our producer, and AJ Yee, who helps us to post the show. I'll be back with Julie soon, but for now, once again, my name is Jonathan Hughes, and this has been the MASFAA Podcast.